hello everyone. Today we'll be talking about identity and belonging, second generation migrants of African descent in Athens, and their unique experiences resulting from a legal framework that's quite restrictive, and an idea of Greekness that's also quite narrow and racialized. So to talk about all this, I have with me Natani Petros. She's the Diversity Network Officer at Generation 2.0. And yeah, I will let her talk about this. So Natani, if you can tell us a bit about yourself and about Generation 2.0, your position, your work.
Sure, yeah. First of all, thank you very much for inviting us to be part of this series. So I am Natani Petros. My parents are from Ethiopia, but I was born and raised in Athens, Greece. That makes me, as you said, a second generation. And I am currently the Diversity Network Officer of the organization. So in terms of what we do, Generation 2.0 Red is an initiative that launched back in 2006 by a group of young people with migrant origins. We operated firstly as an informal group, and we had the mission, actually our mission was mostly focused on securing the rights of, as we call it, the invisible generation of children born and or raised in Greece from migrant backgrounds. Overall, today, Generation 2.0 Red promotes the equal participation in a diverse society through the empowerment of communities and individuals. Combining research and action, we advocate for the rights of people of different origin, nationality, race, color, religion, and of course, including any type of intersectionality. So in terms of our main field of intervention, it's advocacy, actually aiming to monitor the competent authorities and the proper, in general, implementation of the laws regarding migration, and intervenes in cases of rights violations. So our main target is basically citizenship, immigration, equal treatment, racism and discrimination, and community empowerment. Of course, at the same time, we also provide free services to population with migrant backgrounds, such as legal counseling, Greek and citizenship lessons, and of course, career counseling.
Okay, nice. So as I said, Greece has a pretty restrictive citizenship regime compared to other EU countries and to the UK, which makes it really hard for long-term migrants to become citizens, and most importantly for people who are actually born in Greece but to non-Greek parents. So I would like you to kind of tell us how can someone access citizenship at the moment, and maybe briefly, because of course this is a bit technical, the recent changes, this 2010 change, and what happened at the Constitutional Court, if you think it's relevant.
Yeah, so first of all, the first step to understand the context of citizenship in Greece is to understand also the principle that is based on, right? So in Greece in general, there is the law of blood. So in the case of law of blood, the child's citizenship is determined by its parents' citizenship. So in Greece, really that basically has worked and still works as a barrier, because in the case of first generation migrants who came in the late 70s, 80s, 90s in Greece and become parents or brought the child at an early age, there were so many legal gaps that existed in the system and still exist that really made the process of even having a residence permit difficult and complex to access, and let alone be granted with citizenship through the process of naturalization. So these legal gaps from the past brings us to the present, and really the effects are impactful because most of the second generation individuals had actual access to the citizenship after 2015, when the actual law was established. Until then, most of us really didn't have any citizenship. And that means you couldn't participate in elections, you didn't have work access to the public sector, and therefore permanent employment. And in general, you were treated as a third country national, even though you had lived all your life in a country member of EU, right? So basically, there are three specific milestones that changed the citizenship setting in Greece. So the first milestone, as you mentioned, is the year of 2010, where there was an extensive reform of the provisions of naturalization. And for the first time, there was a provision introduced for the granting of citizenship to the second generation due to birth in Greece and or attending to Greek school, right? So the second milestone comes in 2013, which the Council of State ruled the acquisition of citizenship by application declaration for the second generation was unconstitutional. So at that point, basically everything froze, and the foreigners and immigration directorates were not either accepting new application or examining the ones that already existed. And the third milestone, the final one, comes in 2015 when the relevant law finally established the law of citizenship for the second generation, and it is the one that exists until today.
Okay, great. You've touched upon this a little bit, but I would like to hear more about your kind of experience growing up and living in Athens under this kind of very, I don't know, strange and yeah.
Well, the truth is that the dominant feeling growing up in Greece is definitely the feeling that you don't belong, that you are not actual part of the Greek society just because of who I am actually. So the truth is that before adulthood, before turning 18, you don't really realize how a piece of paper may affect you and may affect the way you involve within in society and in general in the world. So I have so many experiences. It's quite a bummer, but I do have a lot of experiences. But the truth is that my first wake-up call to reality was definitely once I finished school. It was back in 2010. So I decided to take a gap year before entering university. And so at my gap year, I wanted to find my first job so I can finally become independent. So the time when an employee wanted to hire me, even though I had a residence permit, I didn't have access to labor market because as underage, I had just turned 18, as I mentioned before. My permit was part of my parents' permit, as a family member. So therefore, I had to wait for the permit to expire and then do the application for the residence permit that grants you with work access, such a huge process. And I just waited for it was, I think, 7-8 months. Half of the year was gone without doing nothing. And it was really disappointing because, it felt actually unfair. And most importantly, you couldn't understand why I had to prove my legality since I was born and raised in Greece, right? And the most unfortunate part of all these types of events and experiences is that you experience them while you are young, you're still carefree, you don't really understand how the world works. So you pass by through different phases like anger, frustration, sadness, hopelessness. But it's definitely, I would say, if I see it in a more positive way, it is a process that brings you in a state of realization. It definitely makes you work harder for the next generation not having the same issues as us.
So I would like to talk about this kind of Afro-Greek identity. And the potential it holds for diversifying Greek identity. To me, there seems to be something changing in kind of the collective imagination and understanding of Greekness. As kind of more and more people of color, and especially Afro-Greeks, they're very vocal. They claim visibility and put forward this identity. So in a way, and to some extent, the idea of Greeks of color, I think it's becoming more kind of everyday. I also think that there is more, a lot more representation in for sure in the art scene, and then in pop culture, especially mainstream culture, and even the TV, you know. So would you agree with that? And is that something that helps? Is that what does it mean for everyday life?
In terms of whether the idea of Greeks of color becoming more everyday, I would say definitely no, it's not becoming an everyday thing, because the understanding of Greekness in general relies strongly on the white, originated from the Asian Greece identity, right? So it is very limited, the perception of the Greekness that is including any other characteristic or identity. And I don't believe that is collective. For example, in Generation 2.0, right, in our organization, we are working for a more inclusive society, right? And to claim that for other countries, it may seem, you know, ordinary, but in Greece, we really have a long way from the diversification of the Greek identity. Because a simple example is that people often comment, "My Greek," and they always say, "How do you speak Greek so well?" And even though that I've provided them with the whole context that I was born here, raised here, so basically that makes it my native language, right? My mother tongue. And yeah, most of the people are usually surprised. So that means actually that people cannot even imagine that a person of color may be Greek, right? And a simple example is also that if you take a simple walk around Athens, really you will witness whiteness all around you, except if you go through a specific district. So despite the fact that there is, to some extent, representation in the Greek art scene or even sports, I believe it's not enough, because the representation is not vertical, meaning that it's not across all industries and of course hierarchies, and surely it's not at a level that reflects the Greek society. And I think it comes as no surprise that people of color are more visible only to these specific areas, right? Like arts, pop culture, and sports. So definitely concluding, I would say that we have a long way to go. So in terms of the Afro-Greek identity, so, you know, the power of names and naming is definitely part of the evolving language, right? Of the evolving language of diversity, and definitely highlights that groups of people who have been excluded or marginalized in the past in general are now in a place of self-determination to change the narrative, right? Even though identity can be something extremely personal and nuanced. So some people may identify as Afro-Greeks, others may identify by just stating the country of origin and adding that they were born or raised in Greece. I think both sides have the same objective, and it's not necessarily claiming visibility, but more improving visibility through self-identification, and definitely language reveals this change in attitudes.
This brings me quite nicely to my last question, which is around racism, language discourse. I feel that race as a topic, especially in kind of the modern conceptions of race as it intersects with gender and class, I feel that it has not been addressed in Greece. There is this narrative, as you said, that, you know, Greece does not have a colonial past. It was never a colonial power. There is no like this white guilt. Greek identity is very much linked with like ancient Greece and certain ideas of whiteness, right? So I think that, yeah, there's a whole identity built around that. But obviously there is racism. It's at the same time very, very in your face. Like a couple of weeks ago, we witnessed with the brutal murder of the Roma youth by the police, but also like very covert and everyday, as you said, barriers to the job market and to finding a house. So for me, there is something about language here, and I think that in Greece we don't have yet this kind of politically correct terminology, which I don't know, it must affect like the experiences of people of color. And again, this collective imagination, understanding of Greekness, what is Greek and who can be Greek. So just one final comment on this. What is your take on this, both personally but also professionally, because you are the diversity of right?
Well, first of all, race and let alone race and intersectionality is definitely not part of the discourse in Greece, right? Because the discussion about race is usually absorbed under the umbrella of migration, right? Which is a broader context and not necessarily related with race. And yeah, racism takes many forms and can happen in many places. And it's not only about the race-based prejudice, right? It has to do in general on the dynamic of superiority in terms of a group of persons of one color or ethnic origin, right? So in that way, it can exist in a variety of practices, beliefs, phenomena, etc., that work to reproduce a racial hierarchy and in general a structure of power and privilege for some and discrimination and oppression for others. So I think relating racism only with colonialism would really narrow our understanding on how racism is present and a reality in many societies, including the Greek society. So yes, Greece was never a colonial power, but there is a very nationalist, ethnocentric identity, as mentioned at the beginning. And that is explained by its past and recent historical dimensions, right? So there is this overall feeling of nationalism, xenophobia, and in general, intolerance, which, as you mentioned, it is reflected on the terminologies used in the media and the politics and daily life in general. So some examples of inappropriate wording or phrases that we have located is, for example, the phrase illegal migrant, which is unacceptable because it is undocumented. It's undocumented is the correct phrase, right? It's a correct word. And also when they speak about second generation, they always say second generation migrants for some reason. And, that's not correct because we never migrated from the country we were born. And of course, there are also other words to use used in Greek for people of color that cannot be really translated in English. Excuse me. So on that basis, our organization, for example, decided to run the campaign, racism, to a bit more broaden the understanding of racism in order to begin to cultivate a culture of actively doing the work to challenge the racism we encounter in our daily lives. And of course, in terms of my position on what I do, we facilitate diversity trainings, diversity and inclusion trainings, and we always try to tackle the inappropriate wording by including sections that elaborate on the terms that are acceptable to use nowadays, highlighting obviously the importance of consciousness when referring to other social identity groups.
Yeah, that's really important work. I mean, it's like having the words, to talk about all this is really, really important. Thank you, Natani. Thank you for sharing this and for your time and for all this knowledge.
Thank you for your time and for inviting us, of course.